What's up, future shred lords? Welcome back. Down to the fingers. Got to ask a great question about minimalist music, essentially. I believe the person's conundrum was that they were going to be playing, this little sort of intimate club and stuff like that, but just as a solo guitarist, and they were like, I want to kind of change it up where I just do sort of like more soundscape stuff. So based around some simple theory principles, how do you get from A to B? And that's what we're going to look at today. So we're using the key of B major. It's awesome, of course. So we're going to go over all the trimmings and all that good stuff. So grab the guitar, crank up the effects, and let's do this. All right, step one here obviously is just choosing a key. I use B major. That way you guys can mess around with E major and A major, or E minor and A minor. It doesn't really matter if you're doing the relative major or a minor key, whatever. And you should be doing both, obviously. But in this case, I'm using B, right? So obviously I'm starting here at the 7th fret on the low E string, right? And I'm just moving down diatonically. There's 7, half step down. 6, a whole step down from that. Another whole step. 5, another whole step. 4, right? Then I'm jumping down to this, of course, D sharp in this case, right? And then, yeah, C sharp, finally to the B. So you can see I'm just moving down the B minor scale. That's it. Quite literally is all I'm doing, or B major, I should say, not B minor. I'm just moving down the scale each step. So that's, right there should be a big one, because you're like, well, then I can adapt that idea over to the natural minor scale, the harmonic minor scale, the melodic minor. It is an amazing training tool for you to keep these kinds of ideas relatively simple and then just manipulate the intervals to really take your sort of music knowledge to the next level. Right? So start off obviously with the major stuff, but then a few years down the road, don't be afraid to start adapting over this basic principle to another scale system like the melodic minor, and see what you can do with that, and just start to grow your mind at what's possible to be played on the instrument based around your ability to hear new and more interesting and complex sounds. It's true. It's like when we first try coffee, you're like, not so much. But when you're an adult, whatever, coffee's great. It's beer, alcohol, whiskey. It's all the same. At first you're like, it's not my cup of tea. But eventually you start to get into it. You're like, I can actually sort of, if you're really into it, decipher the different flavors and whatnot. It's the exact same thing with music, except we do it with sounds. Right. So afterwards, I'm choosing an interval structure. In this case, it's the 10th, right? And what I mean by that is there's the first note of the scale. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 9, and 10. I was going to say 1, 2 again, right? But obviously, that is the 3rd degree of the B major scale. So I'm playing this and I'm going past an octave to get to the 3rd degree again. So we call that a 10th, right? Of course, when you're talking about chords and intervals, you're going every other note in the scale, right? So 1, 3, 5, 7, to get 2, 4, and 6, we then have 9, 11, and 13. Right. So when you're talking about going past the octave, though, and staying on the even numbers, you end up with the 10th, obviously, and so on and so forth. So, Bob's your uncle kind of situation, but I guess it's worth noting that. And then, of course, I'm just following basic diatonic theory by ascending and descending using this simple sort of structure, right? The major moving to minor here at the 7th degree. 6 is going to be minor. Major is going to be at 5, right? Of course, major at 4. I'm still at minor. Now 3, 2, and then 1. And you can see it's always the same shape, essentially. When I'm doing this one here, I've got the notes displaced by 1 fret. But when I want to go minor, of course, I've got to lower that note now to get the minor variant. And since it's going to be the minor configuration for these two here kind of situation, the 7 and the 6. Now, listen, people are like, 7, isn't that supposed to be diminished? Yes, but in this case, when you're talking about these types of intervals, you just get major and minor. I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, so that's step number 1. Choose a key and then sort of work through your idea. In this case, we're just descending diatonically. And so this is my first step. There's my next one. There's my next one. Here's the next one, of course, to the open position. I'm moving down to the next set of strings here, of course, down again, and then, of course, to the open position again. And later on, I sort of start ascending, right? I know, shocker. I know, right? So I kept it very simple and straightforward for everyone to be able to jump in on the fun. And you can take these exact same configurations and use them on the, of course, on the E string. I would start there first, of course, and you'll be like, okay, that's awesome. Right? It's basically the Blackbird chord, right? So there's the last piece of the puzzle. Let's move on to section 2 here, or step 2, if you will, where we basically start adding in the melody component. All right, with step 2 here, essentially, we're just throwing the melody on top of this little interval, sort of diatonic interval sequence where we're just basically outlining the scale. No big deal, right? So where do those notes come from? Well, when I know that I'm playing in B major, that makes this the 1st degree. That gives me an E-type chord here from the Cage system, right? It also gives me the classical method. And keep going, right? 2 octaves. So all those notes now become integral. Of course, you also have the Locrian mode, 3 notes per string, right? Because those are going to overlap. There's some more up here. Right, or you could even look at the major scale, 3 notes per string too, if you wanted to. But you're starting to see the systems overlap. And so when you're doing this interval here, right, you're like, you immediately get these sequences of notes, right? Because you can see the 2 systems superimposed over top of each other, which gives you all of the tools necessary, right? In this case, that note came from this Locrian position. Right, so that's where I sort of saw that note. I was like, okay, I'm basically climbing up here. Might as well jump up the interval. Right, of course, doing the again for this one type deal. And you can keep going. It's nice. That's a sort of like, like a 2nd or a 7th type interval, right? Again. You might be noticing when I bar and move immediately to the next string, which is preferable than doing, say, 3 notes or whatever, using both fingers on the same string. If you have to, then you have to, right? But if you can practice basically doing this bar and getting all those notes to ring out, it's going to be better for you, right? Of course. And I can just hear these notes in my head, right? Of course. moving to the 5 chord here. People are like, why go to this F sharp? Because the F sharp here is the 5 of the B. So when I move here, I do this perfect cadence. And that is obviously as old as the hills. It's going back, of course, to the classical days, but it's so ubiquitous that people love its sound. And so throwing it in there in a sneaky way, if you will, by using these 10th intervals can be very effective, right? And of course, you can see me using that as the leaping off point for the B major scale. Right, so there it is. Essentially, you have to see these multiple systems happening at the same time, right? And so the interval ends up being one because, of course, you could basically pair up all the intervals with each of the notes. Now, some of them are going to sound better than the others, right? Obviously, but using the 10th, obviously the Blackbird chord it's going to be very pleasing and, of course, give you lots of options to play with. And you can play these chords all day at any gig or something like that, and nobody's going to get angry at you or whatever else. The thing is, to start to kick it up a notch. You can see me do that essentially when I do this ascending run using, again, the B major, right? So I'm using the 10ths, and then I'm now substituting in another note with the pedal tone. Again, that's a nice one, come on. Again. And those intervals keep expanding, right? So it creates a really pleasing effect overall. And that's basically what you're really looking to do. You don't have to be, super classical master and all the rest of that. But what you do have to do is essentially, have enough dexterity in your fingers, if you will, to be able to do some simple movements like that, where you're just pairing up an interval and then, of course, just tacking on the melody note. And you're like, I can do this melody note and then pull off to this pedal tone. And all of a sudden you have this really interesting and complex sounding idea that isn't really that complex. If you practice that for about a month or maybe even just a couple weeks, you would have it down like that. So it's no big deal, right? Just don't let these things defeat you before you even get started. Instead, look at it as a challenge and then do it up, right? Let's move on to the last section here where we just go full Monty with the chords. Good times. All right, step 3 here is obviously taking the idea of just a simple interval, if you will, and kicking it up to a chord. But, to keep things real, I sort of dumb the actual sort of melody stuff down to just one note, right? So you notice when I kind of up the complexity of the idea, I sort of subtract. I'm not doing, 3 or 4 notes in the sequence now with respect to the melody, even though I'm basically doing it kind of in a scalar methodology. Now I'm just adding one note because it's a lot more difficult for me to do these drop chords, right? So there's my B major 7. And people are like, how did you know that one? Because basically this B major 7 is the B note over top of this D sharp minor here, right? And I'm just moving the root. So there's a cool little song idea. B minor, or D sharp minor, I should say, to B. And that's basically any one chord, right? If you wanted it to be B here, B minor to the G. Right, so it works in any key kind of situation, but that is the essence of a drop chord, is basically you pairing up the appropriate triad with a bass note and essentially excluding one of the intervals that's close by, right? So in this case, it makes sense just to have the roots, right? And of course, I'm jumping down. Now this one, again, it's an extension of the minor 7, all bass drum. Again, just your simple scale idea from B major, whether it's 3 notes per string, if you want to look at it that way, or something else. It's totally up to you, right? And you can start messing with it too. Instead of using the major scale notes, you sneak in one from the melodic minor or the harmonic minor. Who knows? It could sound really, really great, right? So again, you start us off with this home bass kind of deal, and then next position, half step down. I'm borrowing a dominant 7, in this case G major 7, to set up to go to the F sharp major 7, right? It's classic from like a movie type era. Of course, jumping into this E major 9. And then, of course, one more time, D sharp major. In this case, it's, I'm not exactly sure what that is. The thing is, and I want to mention this, when I did it, I was just like, that's a cool chord. And I just left it in there and I didn't bother to actually figure out what the actual chord is because I don't care. And then going, of course, to the extra extension there, moving down now to the C major, setting up perfectly for the open B there, and then just this big B open chord. Nice. I don't even think I played it right. I don't think I did it twice now. There it is. Wow. It's really weird doing that. I almost never do it on the low strings like that, so I'm not gonna lie, that was weird. I'm leaving it in there. Right, and of course, all I do here is another B minor triad there. Jumping down. Where's that? Oh, that's this one here. That's the F sharp, right? That's coming from there. E. So F sharp E. That's the 5/4 chord. Then of course B. There's the 1 chord. Jumping down the F sharp again. Nice. And then here. And of course, I do this cool sort of inversion of the B major scale instead of just, staying on the open there by adding in this interval from the actual chord itself, the 3 or the 5. I'm pretty sure it's the 3 in that case. You get this, of course, sort of like question mark at the end of your music, which is a hallmark of many, many classical songs and sounds amazing, of course. So there it is. I know that I kind of just whipped through this stuff because there's no way I can teach it in even an hour. A lot of it is based on experience. You're like, there's the 1 chord right here at B. So I need a major 7, right? In this case, I'm substituting the diminished for this. And the reason is because I'm using voice leading, right? I want to integrate this note so I can use this minor 7 here, substitute it over top of the Locrian position, of course, down again to the 6th degree. It's just your standard minor 7, and then you're into, normally it would be dominant 7 here, right? But in this case, I do the major 7. Again, another sort of subtle difference there where it's just, when I started here with the G major 7 here, it sounds better with 2 major 7s, right? Then going into the 9th here. And then again, I'm just still following the same prescription, a minor chord there. Again, another minor. Let's see if I can do it now. Nice. Right, so all the way to the end. And of course, you can just keep doing it again and again. Notice how I swapped out that other note there for the one next to it. Another sneaky little trick. You could almost do 2 there, although that would get tricky with moving the fingers around. So the big takeaway here is know what scale degree you're on, and then you'll have a lot better chance of sort of either playing the correct chord or also knowing how to substitute another chord in for it. And that's just it. One day you'll find that you'll be like, okay, this diminished chord here, is very nice and everything, but this one is still sort of like, the same weirdness and actually works better with what I'm doing. So don't get tunnel vision where you just play the chord because you're like, oh, the guy on the internet told me to play diminished here. Yes. In its natural state, it's diminished. But remember, you can basically swap any chord for almost any other chord as long as you follow a couple simple rules. So that says, that you should be experimenting to a certain degree. And again, you might be noticing something here when I did the interval exercise. I have this interval, right? And I did that as far as the melody is concerned. And then, of course, all I did was extend it out kind of situation by moving to the B string now. Again, I'm just moving that scale out even more to just grab one more of those high notes so I can now pair it up with this chord I was doing before, which is This is essentially what I'm getting at, right? And then I just filled in an extra note there to give it even a bit more spicy, of course, right? Then, of course, you take the tension of that saucy chord off with the next one, of course. Me setting up the next one. Then another interest chord before it gives me transitionary power. Another transition setting up, of course, the one chord here. And so again, you see the basic music principles at work every single time, and that's why you need to train your mind to be like, not play licks. Instead, see the fretboard broken down into the sections. Oh, there's the Ionian position, Locrian, Aeolian, Mixolydian, Lydian, and to the open there, right? Going down even more, Phrygian, Dorian. And then be like, oh, if I want to play the Dorian scale, I have to play this configuration using the classical method. I have to do this configuration, doing 3 notes per string. And then all of a sudden, all the pieces will start to fall into place for you. And all of that information will synchronize. So instead of it just being like, oh, there's the first degree of a scale, you're like, I have a major arpeggio, an E-type major chord. Right, I have the classical position, I have 3 notes per string. I have this variation of the harmonic minor or the melodic minor, so on and so forth. And so now you have all of those tools at your fingertips in the moment. So when you're dropping this very simple sort of like harmonic structure, you now have all the extra notes that you can fill in to create the sound that you're hearing in your head. Right. I hope this helped. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate every single one of you. Experiment. Lots of effects. Go slow. Lots of effects. And you'll have a great time. Just take the edge off, chill out, relax, and enjoy yourself. And of course, I'll see you in the next one.